our live. Many of you saw the previous work that we did with Kirstie about the Free Jason Moore campaign. You know, it was something that really got a lot of people up in arms, particularly with the family members of the victim lobbying to get the guy convicted of murder out of prison. I've never come across a situation like that before in my life, and it says a lot about how bloody innocent Jason Moore is. So I'm going to introduce everybody first, and thanks for joining us wherever you're watching it, Facebook, Twitter, etc., around the world. We will have the opportunity for questions as well. So we've got Kirstie, who has been the tip of the spear with all the other stuff that we've done. And for the first time on the channel, we've got Joanne Grenfell, Bishop of Stepney. So thanks for joining us, guys. And we have got Charles Thompson from NewsQuest. So Kirstie's links, the website for Jason Moore, the Twitter, and the petition are all in the description box below this video if you are watching it on the YouTube version. So I know many of you have probably logged on and you're thinking, who the hell is Jason Moore? So we are going to recap the story just to fill you guys in, you know, to get the complete back history of what has happened here. So should I hand it over to you, Kirstie?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I'm just going to read what I prepared earlier because it gets to the point. My brother Jason Moore is serving life in prison for the murder of Robert Darby. There is no forensic evidence linking him to the crime. He didn't match the witnesses' descriptions of the killer. Jason stepped forward as a witness, revealing he had been in the passenger seat of a car parked during the incident. This crucial detail led the police to arrange an identification parade a few days later, 8 years after the event. One witness refused to participate, citing the impossibility of remembering after such a long time. However, Abdul Ahmed attended and quickly identified Jason as the stabber, despite having identified someone else back in 2005. From then on, the police focused their efforts on building a case against Jason. We now know the police had lots of evidence that Jason was not the killer. We also now know that they knew all along that the witness who identified Jason had serious credibility issues, and the ID parade they put Jason into was improper and should never have happened. The evidence that Jason was wrongfully convicted is so strong that the victim's family are fighting with us for his conviction to be quashed. However, all of this information was technically available to Jason's defense at the time. They just missed it. The law says that because of this, he can't use any of it to appeal his conviction. He has to have new evidence. So in 2021, we asked NewsQuest, which runs Jason and Robert's local papers in East London, to reinvestigate the case. Their investigative reporter, who's here with us today, Charles Thompson, managed to uncover shocking new evidence. We now have an appeal pending with the Criminal Case Review Commission. But remember, there's no evidence against Jason Moore, only sworn statements of 2 witnesses at the scene of the crime. There is no DNA evidence against Jason. There's no weapon. There's nothing to tie Jason to this crime. It's either police corruption or corruption somewhere down the line. Jason has been fitted up. Jason Moore is a body put into prison to save somebody else. And in my opinion, it's an absolute disgrace. And
it absolutely reeks of police corruption. So I'll go around the screen then, and I'll start with Joanne. Joanne, thanks for joining us again. And could you tell the viewers, please, how you came to be interested in this case?
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, you've met Kirstie. She's pretty persuasive, so that's why I'm here. She's a force of nature, and I hugely respect her because she's just put her life and soul into this for so many years. And I'm her bishop. I'm Church of England bishop, so I'm there for everybody. And her family's got strong connections with the patch where I work. And so when she kind of knocked on my door and said, will you help? I was like, oh, what's this then? But I read the stuff she gave me, and I was like, my goodness, if he's in prison, then the justice system's unsafe for all of us. I could be in prison. And if I am in prison, I hope I've got a Kirstie fighting for me. So I've got this real strong sense of injustice. And I thought, I'm up for helping. So here I am.
So, Joanne, I imagine you get a lot of people knocking on your door asking for help. What in particular about Jason's situation stood out for you?
There's a few things. I mean, like Kirstie's already said, the complete lack of evidence is one of the biggest things. The second thing was that the victim's family are on her side. They're rooting for her. They're campaigning. I've met them. They're brilliant people. I can't imagine the pain they're still going through, knowing that the wrong man's in prison. But I think also it was a sense about justice that matters to me as a Christian, because it's about the kind of how the world is and what's fair. And we rely on our government to run that, to administer justice, because it's, we don't live in a perfect world. It's it's not the kingdom of God at the moment, but the government's got to do that for us, and we've got to trust that they do it properly. And they've got to get it right. And there's also got to be review if there's a chance they might have got it wrong. That's an essential part of justice. And everything I've seen so far of the Criminal Cases Review Commission just being so slow, so overwhelmed by work, so unwilling to answer. And the stuff about having to have new evidence when, frankly, there wasn't any evidence to start with, just makes me think that the system's wrong. And that bothers me because, as I said before, then if Jason could be in prison, any one of us could be in prison, and that's not justice.
Thanks, Joanne. So I'm going to get back to you about meeting the family in a minute. Let's just bring Charles in, though. So we've got Charles Thompson from NewsQuest. So what got you interested in this case, Charles? And thanks for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me. So what happened was in autumn of 2021, our news desk received an email from the Free Jason Moore campaign with a big PDF attachment detailing all of the things that they said were wrong with Jason's conviction. And as the investigative reporter for NewsQuest in London, this very hefty PDF document was sent over to me to look at. At the time, my editor and I had just finished a podcast about a paedophile ring cover-up, and we were looking for the subject of what would become our next true crime podcast, and this PDF landed in our laps. And I read it and felt that if everything that was in it was correct, then we had a very important story that had just come into us in the inbox. So initially I went and met Kirstie and Jason's partner, Sandra, in a pub in Romford, and had about a 3-hour meeting with them, and became even more concerned that if everything they were telling me was correct, something had gone seriously awry in this case. And after discussing it with my editor, we decided we would take it on. We would take it on as the next podcast, on the condition that the Free Jason Moore campaign would not inhibit us in any way. So we wanted to be sure they weren't just sort of cherry picking what evidence they were showing us. So our condition was we have to have access to everything, your whole archive of court records, and they gladly agreed. And so it was and continues to be a long process of working on the case. Boxes and boxes of documents, dozens of interviews, and along the way have uncovered even more stuff that we didn't know about before, including the new evidence, which is now forming the basis of the CCRC application. So Jason's lawyers are now seeking an appeal based on the new information that NewsQuest was able to uncover.
Oh, fantastic. Kirstie, are we allowed to discuss the new evidence, or would that jeopardize the legal proceedings?
No,
Well,
it's out there.
what we can discuss is certain parts of that new evidence. And it was Charlie that, through his podcast series and Rights of Reply, got to speak to the witness that we had been saying to the Court of Appeal and our previous CCRC application. We were saying, look, this particular witness has got it wrong, and we were asking them to re-interview him and to take another look. And unfortunately, on our first Criminal Case Review Commission, i.e. the CCRC application, they refused to do so. And one of the reasons I believe, after reading it, and I don't know if Charlie would agree with me, was that they made a mistake, and they seem to say that 2 witnesses agreed on certain points, and they actually didn't. And that's an alarming. It's alarming in the fact that they used that as part of the reason to refuse to move Jason on to the Court of Appeal. So basically what it meant, had Charlie not been around at the time working on this podcast or looking at the case, what it would actually mean is this Criminal Case Review Commission had shut us down. Now, to go back to them, we need new evidence. And, new evidence doesn't grow on trees, as you can imagine. So we were sort of stopped dead. And Jason would have been sitting in prison right now, having no more new evidence. And I think it's a really important point that journalists, should be applauded for their efforts in looking at cases like this, because when you have a body of people that are put there to protect you from this kind of thing happen, and they're obviously broken, as we've seen in the Andrew Malkinson case and so on lately, and this just come out the postmasters, you can see that they are not performing to their best ability, and that means that mistakes happen, and it happened in this case. So then came along Charlie. He managed to speak to the witness, and I'll tell you, and Charlie can tell you what that witness said.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so going through the case files, it was very clear that the police knew all along that this one eyewitness had some very severe credibility issues. So there were 2 eyewitnesses to the stabbing of Robert Darby. One was a man called Abdul Ahmed, and the other one was a lady who was codenamed Sally Palmer. Her real name was never put into the public domain. Sally Palmer and Abdul Ahmed agreed on certain details, and all of the details that they agreed upon were exculpatory for Jason. So the details that they agreed upon were that the stabber was a man wearing a blue zip-up jacket, that the stabber was the same height as the man who got stabbed, Robert Darby, and that the stabber did not have long hair, whereas Jason Moore had long hair. So Jason Moore is about half a foot taller than Robert Darby. He was not wearing a blue jacket on the day, and he had long, floppy hair, whereas the witnesses said that the guy had short hair, and one of the witnesses, Mr. Ahmed, said he had a shaved head, in fact. The police, however, quickly ascertained that Mr. Ahmed was also giving them some details which were not correct. For example, he told the police that both of the Robert Darby exited a car and the assailant exited a car. Mr. Ahmed said that he watched them both pull up at the same time and the people jump out of them. In fact, when the police checked the CCTV, the cars arrived about 7 minutes apart. Mr. Ahmed told the police that the incident had happened in the wrong place in the road, for example. So there were elements of his story which were just demonstrably not correct. He told the police on the day he did not believe that he would recognize anybody if they asked him to participate in a lineup. However, they then asked him to participate in some lineups anyway. When he did participate in those lineups, he picked a thin-faced man with a shaved head and a receding hairline as the stabber. He could, aside from being a different gender or race, he could scarcely have looked any less like Jason Moore. He looked more like the Crystal Maze guy. And the person that he picked out in that lineup was an innocent lineup volunteer. So he not only picked out somebody who looked nothing like Jason, but also somebody who was absolutely nothing to do with the crime. That, you would think, would be the end of Mr. Ahmed as a witness. However, when Jason comes forward about 7 years later and says, "Look, I'm willing to tell you what happened now. I was there. I was sat in the passenger seat of a parked car, and I saw what happened." The police go back to Mr. Ahmed's statement, and he had said in his witness interviews that the stabber had emerged from the passenger side of a car Now, Mr. Ahmed says that the stabber emerges from the passenger side of a small silver car that looks like a Ford Fiesta. Jason was sat in the passenger side of a brand spanking new top of the line BMW convertible. So again, there is no reason to believe that the car that Mr. Ahmed is describing is the car that Jason was sitting in, and Mr. Ahmed's description of the stabber does not match Jason. But the police decide that because the words passenger side of a car appear in Jason's witness statement and Mr. Ahmed's witness statement, they're going to put Jason into a lineup 7 years after the crime. So Mr. Ahmed comes in, and would you believe it, he picks out Jason and says that's the stabber. Except Jason looks nothing like the man that he described to the police on the day of the incident, and he looks nothing like the man that he picked out previously, who turned out to be innocent. But the police rely on this identification, which is inherently flawed, to charge Jason with the crime. And we know that because there's a document in the case files. The police say, we have arrested and charged Jason Moore based on the identity parade with Mr. Ahmed. So Jason goes to trial and gets convicted. And then all these years later, I start looking at the case. And one of the things I did was went and interviewed a bunch of eyewitness identification experts who told me lots of things which raised big red flags about Jason's conviction. But one of the things they said was that the identification procedure that Jason was subjected to should never have happened. It was a complete breach of best practice. And the reason for that is the police had already shown Mr. Ahmed Jason's picture before they went into the lineup. So Mr. Ahmed would already have had a memory trace of Jason from having been shown his photograph by the police prior to that lineup. So that identification parade was completely flawed, should never have happened. And having done all of this investigation into Jason's case, I needed to give Mr. Ahmed right of reply, because, if you're going to publish something in a newspaper which is critical of an individual, it's best practice to give that person a meaningful right to respond. And so I contacted Mr. Ahmed in the hope that he would sit down with me and have a convivial conversation where I could talk to him about the many issues with his various conflicting statements, not least identifying two different people as the killer who could scarcely look anything less like each other. Anyway, Mr. Ahmed did not respond very well to my approach. And after not long, after maybe 10 minutes of me talking to him, he just started shouting at me. And he said, "It was the blink of the eye. I was passing by. How can you remember things like that?" And I was drunk. And I just couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe what he had said to me. I just couldn't believe it. So my instinct was to try to get him to say it again. So I just pretended that I hadn't heard him, because I didn't want there to be any vagueness about what he'd said. So I said, "And you were what, sorry?" And he said, "I was drinking alcohol." I asked him if he was confident that he'd picked out the right person, and he said he didn't know if he had picked out the right person. Now, this is very, very important for two reasons. Firstly, I went and interviewed an eyewitness identification expert who specializes in the impact of alcohol on witness testimony. And that expert said, yes, absolutely, being drunk would impact the reliability of a witness's evidence, and the jury should have been told that. The second reason it's important is because I asked Mr. Ahmed if he had told the police that he was drunk at the time, and he said, yes, I told them. Now, if that is true, then it was covered up, because I have been over the disclosure with a fine-tooth comb. There is nothing in any of Mr. Ahmed's witness statements that says he was drunk. There is nothing in any witness statement by any police officer who dealt with Mr. Ahmed that says that he was drunk. There is nothing in any of Mr. Ahmed's interviews that says he was drunk. There's nothing in the transcript from the trial of Mr. Ahmed's evidence that says he was drunk. It was not disclosed to the defense. So this puts the authorities in an unenviable position, I would say, because they are left with a choice. Their choice is they can accept that Mr. Ahmed told them that he was drunk and that they covered it up, or they can say that their own star witness is a liar who is lying about telling them that he was drunk. And I would submit that neither of those things leaves them in a good position, particularly because Mr. Ahmed was basically the only evidence that they had against Jason Moore. There was no DNA tying him to the crime, no fingerprints, no weapon, no CCTV, nothing. Their whole case was Abdul Ahmed.
Yeah, and for us, can you imagine? You've been to the Court of Appeal. Please, this man has got it wrong. All the paperwork around this man, it didn't matter what you were reading, it was confusion. He didn't speak good English. The police didn't offer him an interpreter. The police actually started a reconstruction on this man's evidence, and they quit it because they couldn't get a handle on it. So another thing that they didn't tell the jury. But what it did for me personally, who'd been sitting there for 8 years looking at all this, confusion around this man, is it made sense. By him saying he was drunk made sense of everything, because he was obviously incoherent because the paperwork was telling you so. So that was like a big moment for us, because, let's just hope that they see it in the same light. But again, with the Criminal Case Review Commission, it was one of the reasons I talk about all this stuff, because, again, not to keep going on about it, but the Andrew Malkinson case, he was convicted on eyewitness testimony, nothing else. It was just that, So when you're looking at all this stuff and your life, is destroyed, because the police aren't looking properly. They're not looking at the evidence that's saying this man hasn't done it. And one thing that stands out with this case is there was 3 men in the street. They were all under 6 foot, according to 2 witnesses. And there was a 4th man at the street, and he was 5'7". The police had him in custody, yet they didn't put him on an ID parade. These are question marks that should be answered. And unfortunately, people like Jason that are innocent sitting in prison, they can't be out here fighting for themselves because they're in prison. So it's left to people like us to do it. And it's shocking that, mistakes are being made and they're not being rectified. The Criminal Case Review Commission know about that mistake in the first application, yet they haven't done anything about it. So without the evidence of Abdul Ahmed saying he was drunk and the non-police disclosure, Jason would still be sitting in prison. So how many more people are out there suffering that because of mistakes in the system? So, it's a big one for me. And, it's things have got to change,
Thank you. Joanne, what do you think about this new evidence and this unreliable, inebriated witness?
It's shocking. I mean, I can't really think of words to describe how utterly incoherent and incompetent it is. And that's not justice. That's not fair on Jason sitting in prison with no evidence to put him there or keep him there. And it makes me doubt the whole system. And if you can't trust the police and if you can't trust the review part of the criminal justice system, then where's justice?
And when you've met the family members of the victim, did they express to you their chief concerns?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really moving to meet them. They came with Kirstie the first time I met her and sat around my dining room table, and they told me. And what I think hurts is that they're grieving the loss of their family member, but they're also grieving because they know that the wrong man's in prison. So there's no justice for them. And they see Kirstie and her family, Jason's mum, sitting at home having, lost the presence of their lovely brother and son who should be out there living his life like a normal person, and they feel the pain of that family. Now, I think that's really generous of them because they could just be wrapped up in their own grief, but what they're saying is that this doesn't bring justice if the wrong man goes to prison and stays there. So they were incredibly supportive, and that's pretty moving to watch.
So,
Yeah,
Charles,
I think one of the shocking things, I mean, for your audience to know, is that the victim's family in this case have been campaigning since the day that they walked out of the Old Bailey.
Yeah.
So what happened to Jason happened, and straight away they approached me and said, I know your brother hasn't done this. There's all different reasons that he knows and the rest of the family know. But, they've been on this campaign, well, on this journey, put it that way, since the day that it happened. They didn't come along later. It was that particular day.
And, I remember you telling me that when you came out of the court and they approached you, you were a bit scared because you thought, help, is there going to be like retribution? But that wasn't why they approached you. They came to say, we know this is wrong and we're with you. And what an incredible moment.
In fact, that is a story in its own, because when this happened back in 2005, the police came to my parents' house and they put the absolute fear into my parents and the rest of the family. And they actually served us with an Osman warning, which basically means, your threat to life and all the rest of it. And they portrayed the Derby family as this criminal East End violent family, and that they would be looking for, to whatever they were going to do. But it was the fear that my sister and my parents actually emigrated. They sold up and left. And Jason stayed away because, they couldn't guarantee if he came back as a witness, they couldn't guarantee his safety. So we were just left out in the cold, not knowing what to do. So that, and then to have the victim's family, after you've been through all that fear and that ordeal of not knowing what to do and all the rest of it, and then to be outside the Old Bailey and they come and tell you that they know that Jason hasn't done this, and that us all leaving and all that wasn't down to them, it was down to the police. So it just goes to show you, I mean, there's traces of it all through this case. There was a witness who had seen Jason after the incident and came forward to say he wasn't wearing a blue jacket. Well, they said to her, well, if you're going to come to court and be a witness, you're going to need an armed guard. And she said to Charlie, actually, when I heard that, I wasn't coming. With regards to Abdul Ahmed, the police went round to his house the night before the trial and the police claimed that he asked to change his statement. Now, after 8 years, nobody should change their statement, because that is there for one reason and one reason only, to refresh your memory of what happened on that day. So why did they allow him to change his statement? So you've got all these little bits and pieces. There was an officer in this case, one of the lead officers, that was selling stories to the newspaper. I mean, these are all little bits, and that's why I said in this, when I first came on here, about police corruption, because there's something not right here. So,
which leads to the next question. Which leads to the next question, actually, which is from one of the viewers, from Kaza, and Kaza would like to know: do you guys suspect that the police know who actually did it? I'll start with you, Kirstie. Go for it, and I'll go round.
100%. Jason was on trial with his co-defendant, and it was his co-defendant that stabbed Robert Darby.
Okay, Joanne, do you believe that the police know who did it, the real perpetrator is?
I don't know whether they know or not, but the point is that the evidence that they've put Jason into prison with is absolutely rotten. And I think if they know, that's just a further level of dishonesty. But that doesn't need to be true for the rest to be wrong. The evidence is just not there.
Charles, do you believe the police know who did it? And if so, what would motivate them to protect this person?
Well, it's worth pointing out that the co-defendant was acquitted by the jury. So I certainly can't say that the co-defendant was the stabber. I think what happens in many police cases is they follow the line of least resistance. So they may have had an idea of who the stabber was, and certainly there's information within the case papers that I've been given access to that suggests that they had their own views as to who the stabber was. But they had a problem. And the problem was they had no forensic evidence, they had no fingerprints, they had no DNA, they had no CCTV. What they had was one female eyewitness who had participated in lineups and picked nobody. And they had one male eyewitness who had participated in a lineup and picked the wrong, picked an innocent person out of the lineup. And they had no case. And so when Jason came forward, they put Jason into a lineup. Somehow Mr. Ahmed ends up picking Jason out. And as I reiterate, Jason did not in any way match the description that Mr. Ahmed gave to the police on the day of the stabber. And he did not in any way resemble the man that Mr. Ahmed picked out, the innocent man that Mr. Ahmed picked out in 2005 as the stabber. But nonetheless, he picked Jason out, and that was the closest thing that they had to a piece of evidence against anybody. And so I think that building a case against Jason was the easiest thing for them to do. And that's why I did it. It was the easiest way to close the case. And what you see as the case gets toward trial is you see certain pieces of evidence which don't accord with the theory that Jason committed the crime being poo-pooed, being suppressed, dampened down. They were disclosed to the defense amid a mountain. I mean, I have been through the case files. It's a room of files. It's boxes and boxes and boxes of files. So it's not surprising to me that Jason's defense missed certain information. But what the prosecution did, for example, this is just one thing that the prosecution did, which strikes me as being quite egregious. When Jason was on the stand, the prosecution presented a still from a CCTV camera, which didn't capture the crime, but captured Jason either before or after the stabbing, on the same day as the stabbing. And the prosecutor said to Jason, "You can't see it very well in this image because it's not very clear, but you're wearing a blue jacket, aren't you?" And Jason is sort of saying, "Well, I don't remember what I was wearing." And he says, "It was a blue jacket, wasn't it?" And Jason eventually says, "Well, look, if you're telling me it was a blue jacket, I'll stipulate that I was wearing a blue jacket, but I don't remember what I was wearing." And then later on, they ask him again, and Jason says, "Yeah, I was wearing a blue jacket." Accepts that he was wearing a blue jacket. What we now know from going through the case files is that the authorities knew that Jason was not wearing a blue jacket that day. And we know that they knew that because it's in their own report. There was a CCTV officer in the case, and they compiled a report where they said, "We've got these various images of Jason throughout the day of the stabbing. We've got him leaving home in the morning. We've got him in a pub later that day. And although some of the images are clearer than others, there are enough distinguishing marks that we can see that he's wearing the same clothes all day. And in the clearer CCTV images, we can see that he is wearing a grey hooded sweatshirt with no zip on it and with distinctive piping down the sleeves and with a mark on the front and a big pocket across the front as well. So there's no way that you could mistake this for a blue zip-up sports jacket." So why is the government prosecutor putting Jason on the stand and berating him, saying, "You're wearing a blue jacket, aren't you? Admit it, you're wearing a blue jacket." They knew he wasn't wearing a blue jacket. Their own CCTV showed he was not wearing a blue jacket. So what you see at trial is behavior that, in my personal opinion, borders on misconduct, at the very least, to try to push the jury in the direction of convicting Jason using information that they know is not correct. They know that Jason was not wearing a blue jacket. So, and then other things they do, for example, we know that the two eyewitnesses, Abdul Ahmed and Sally Palmer, while they diverge on certain details, mostly the most important ones, they do agree on the description of the man who stabbed Robert, which is 5'10" or 5'11" and wearing a blue zip-up sports jacket with, according to Abdul Ahmed, a shaved head, and according to Sally Palmer, normal hair, whatever that means. We know that Jason Moore is 6'5" in shoes, was wearing a grey hooded sweatshirt, and had a big mop of brown thick hair. So he in no way matched the description of the stabber. But what they do at trial is they just erase those details, and they say both of the witnesses agreed that there were a few men in the street, and of the two men that weren't Robert, it was the taller who was the stabber. Is that what you said, Mr. Ahmed? Yes, it was the taller one. The taller one was the stabber. So it's a way of creating this vagueness around the descriptions, which allows them to point in the direction of Jason, when in fact the description did not match Jason. Now, Jason's defense had a duty to point all this out. That Jason's defense dropped the ball big time. Having read the trial transcripts, I don't know what they were doing. These details were all available to Jason's defense, and for some reason they did not utilize them. They really dropped the ball. But that is what has been the big problem, by the way, for Jason, which is that you have this insane system which says you can't overturn your conviction based on information that was available at the time of your trial. So even if the evidence proving your innocence was in the file all along, we won't let you out because you can only appeal if you have new information. Complete insanity. But so that is what has hamstrung Jason. The fact that his defense missed very important details that exonerated him. That the CCTV of Jason in his grey hooded sweatshirt was in the disclosed material, and his defense never used it. The prosecutor is badgering him. Where you were in a blue jacket, you were in a blue jacket. Jason's defense never stand up during their direct examination or redirect and say, doesn't this CCTV image show you in a grey hooded sweatshirt? That would have been very easy for them to do. They didn't do it. So
unbelievable.
Yeah, and also they had the witnesses behind screens. So they were giving all their evidence from behind screens. So they can't see the two men that are standing trial. Had they been able to see them, they would know that because right here, their description of the man is 5'10". If they're looking at a 6'5" man with a great big mop of dark hair and not a number 2 shaved head, it doesn't take much figuring out, does it? But that was another little, from my point of view, it's another little tactic by the police, because what the police did is fed them the same story they fed our family, dangerous, blah, blah, blah. So they're asking for anonymity requests, which say, I'm scared, I don't want to come to court unless they can't see me. So they're behind the screens on that concept. But the reality is had they've not fed them that story, they'd probably just be sitting there looking at them and saying, well, it wasn't him. Do you see what I'm saying? One thing, what Charlie said about our lawyers, you've also got to remember that when you're a normal family and you know nothing about law and you know nothing about the police, you trust the police. You never, ever dream that the police are going to start fitting their case just to use you as a body. You go into that courtroom thinking, well, the British justice system it works. It's good. It's been here for years. It can't go wrong. You're naive. So when you're naive coming into this scenario, you don't know if your lawyers are good or not. You're just paying them the money and hoping that they know what they're doing. So you have everything going against you before you've even stepped foot in a courtroom. And that's one of the in this case. Our lawyers they've got to be the worst lawyers on the planet, because I say it all the time. Had our lawyers said to the two witnesses, Jason Moore is 6'5", was the person that stabbed Robert Darby 6'5", they would have both said no, because they'd already said no.
Yeah.
You know, so it's really frustrating.
You've had a few questions come in from Fred, and they are: how long has Jason been in prison, and what happened at appeal?
So he'll be in prison 11 years, December the 22nd of this year. So over 10 years now. I'm sorry, Sean, what was the other question?
What happened at appeal?
So at the Court of Appeal, they seem to be more interested in the technical problems of coming into the appeal. I think it took us four years to get to appeal, because when you come out of a trial, obviously you have to start building your case again. And to do that, again, new set of lawyers. You give all the lawyers your case files. All your trust is in these lawyers. You've sold your house. You've raised the money. Everything, you know, it's just, so again, it's all in the hands of the lawyers. And, you know, our lawyers were good the second time, and they went into the Court of Appeal trying to get the Court of Appeal to understand that Abdul Ahmed had got it wrong. And initially, Abdul Ahmed was coming to court, and at the last minute, he didn't come. And I think that really went against us at the Court of Appeal. Even the victim's family came to the Court of Appeal and gave evidence. And they were treated shockingly by the police. I mean, he went, Tim Darby, who's the older brother of Robert Darby, he had new evidence and went to the police station, and they told him to go home. They said, look, we've got a body. And he said, no, you've got the wrong body. And they were like, look, if you don't go home, we'll arrest you. So they wouldn't take the evidence off of him. So he went home, and at 3:00 the next morning, two officers appeared on his front doorstep, and they gave him a reverse osmond warning, which is another one of their, you know. So he didn't know what to do. So the next thing, he's got to try and figure it out. And in the end, he ended up and going to see Jason's lawyers, gave a statement there, and then went to the Court of Appeal. But you know what? The Court of Appeal criticised him because he waited so long to give that evidence to Jason's lawyers. But the truth of it is, 2 days later, he went into the police station and said, here, take this evidence, and they wouldn't take it, because that case in their mind was closed. So, you know.
Joanne, anything to add at this stage?
Only that I've found it really interesting watching the comments from your viewers coming in, and just like the incredulity. So it kind of helps to have other people hear it and say that is just so ridiculous. And I hope it's helped Kirstie to know that lots of us have been trying to support her in that way and support the campaign, because we believe her, we believe Jason, we believe they're telling the truth, and this isn't justice. But I've not described this to anybody yet who's gone, oh yeah, no, it doesn't add up. He's probably guilty. Everybody who hears it says, for goodness sake, why is that man in prison? And I just want to keep that sense of incredulity. This is so wrong.
Thanks. Yeah. So Kirstie, earlier on when I asked about, whether the police, you suspect they know who did it, you were the most emphatic with the yes there. Do you also have a theory as to why they are protecting this person then, if that is the case, allegedly?
No. Well, yeah, I do. If I'm honest, I do. I think that...
Yes, you do.
Yeah, I do. But I actually, I can't share.
She doesn't have anything that jeopardizes what's going to come. I think.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. No worries there. All right, viewers, wherever you are watching this, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, if you've got any questions about the Free Jason Moore campaign, please put them in the comments and we will get them to our panel. We've got about 10 minutes left, so get them in. And we'll go back over to Charles now. So, Charles, what do you think that, the potential outcome could be here? I mean, the wheels of justice move incredibly slowly. Could enough pressure be applied, and could with the new evidence,
Well,
could he be freed?
they move slowly and they also move dysfunctionally. So I think there's we're currently working on a podcast series that will come out about Jason's case. And one of the things that I say towards the end of that series is that there are two parallel worlds in an alleged miscarriage of justice. And world number one is common sense world, and world number two is legal world. And in common sense world, it's clear that Jason's conviction is unsafe because the only evidence they had was Abdul Ahmed saying he was the killer. They did not have DNA, they did not have fingerprints, they didn't have a weapon, they didn't have CCTV of him at the crime scene. There was no other witness saying that Jason was involved. They didn't have a confession. They had nothing apart from Abdul Ahmed picking him out of a lineup. He didn't even match the description. He did nothing apart from the lineup. So when the witness that picks Jason out of the lineup says, I was drunk and I might have got it wrong, in common sense world, well, that should be the end of it. But in legal world, it's like another planet. So
Can I
the
also
burden
just
of
say,
proof is reversed. Just as
yeah,
quickly, when you are on trial the first time, you're supposed to not be convicted unless you've been proven guilty beyond any reasonable doubt. How a jury decided Jason had been proven guilty, I think it was probably, if I'm honest, it was probably because he said, if you say I was wearing a blue jacket, then I was wearing a blue jacket, because that tied him to the stabbing. But anyway, once you are convicted, the burden of proof is essentially reversed. So it's no longer good enough to say there is now reasonable doubt as to whether you committed the crime. You basically have to positively prove your innocence. And positively proving your own innocence of anything is basically impossible. Because if you were to say to me, Charlie, you've never been to the Grand Canyon, I could do any number of things to say that I have. I could show you photographs of me at the Grand Canyon. I could produce witnesses who were there with me. I could produce my ticket stub, my credit card, bill. There are all manner of things I could do to prove that I've been there. If you say, Charlie, you have been to the Grand Canyon and you're lying when you say that you haven't, how do I prove that I've not been there? The absence of a photograph just means I could have been there and not taken a picture. The absence of witnesses means I could have just gone on my own. The absence of a ticket means I could have thrown it in the bin. The absence of a credit card receipt means I could have paid cash. So there's no way of me proving that I've never been to the Grand Canyon. So it's effectively, they say to you, you have to prove that you did not commit this crime. That's the only way you can get out. And that's how Andy Malkinson got out. Well, no, it's not how he got out. He served his entire sentence and then got his conviction quashed. So Andy Malkinson was exonerated by DNA because they had the real rapist's DNA under the victim's fingernails and on her underwear and things like that. So they were able to say, Malkinson is not here. His DNA is not here. This DNA must be the rapist. So Malkinson was able to positively prove his own innocence. In the Robert Darby case, there is no DNA. So the whole system is structured in a way as to prevent you from being able to overturn your conviction. The whole system is built to keep you in prison. So will this be enough to get Jason out? I just don't know. In common sense world, of course it should be enough. But what will the CCRC do? We'll have to wait and see. But they don't have the best reputation, and nor does the Court of Appeal.
Okay, we're in the last 5 minutes now, guys. So, Kirstie, what would you like to say in conclusion to the viewers and about the petition?
Well, I just wanted to say one more thing about what Charlie was talking, if that's okay, Sean. I also wanted to let viewers know that for 3 years, I worked closely with ex-Met police who were from the same police force of the police that investigated the case. And after they spent 3 years going through the case files, they were too all in agreement that this was a miscarriage of justice. And getting back to what Charlie was just saying. Well, in this case, the police couldn't establish the crime scene. They overlooked it. So DNA and all the rest of it was lost there. So there's so many bits and pieces. But to get back to what you're saying, yeah, one of the reasons we've come on here today is because we're trying to raise awareness for Jason's case. I mean, we've been to the paper in the papers and the local papers through Charlie, etc., etc. But to get into the Houses of Parliament, to make these problems aware of, we need signatures on a petition, and that's at change.org/free Jason Moore. And I just ask your viewers if they would kindly sign the petition. It's free. It doesn't cost anything. Because if we the people don't stand up and fight for what is right, more and more people are going to face these same problems, and it's just a place that you do not want to be. It will just take your life, and you won't have a life because it's just a terrible place to be. So it can happen to anybody. Jason was just simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, and there's many, many, many more people like Jason in prisons that have got no one to help. So if you can, sign a petition and help us to help other people as well. It's not all about Jason. It's about helping others in the same predicament as Jason. People like Andrew Malkinson don't want to see these people doing their full sentences because, like Charlie said, he couldn't fight his case on the inside. He could only fight it on the outside. So we need all the help we can get and would really appreciate it.
So the petition link, viewers, and the other links are in the description box on the YouTube version. And Joanne, is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion, please?
Yeah, I'm with Kirstie and Jason and all their family for the rest of this campaign, as long as it takes, because I want to see Jason free. So I'm with them. And it matters that the evidence can speak in his case. When that's done, and actually alongside, the other thing that matters is the Criminal Cases Review Commission and looking at its resourcing, its funding, its capacity and its competence, because I don't have trust in that at the moment, and that's an issue for everybody. So it's two things that are going on. Jason, because it's a real person, a real family, don't forget about him in prison, but it's also about the system of justice, because if that's wrong, then there's justice for no one.
All right, thank you for joining us and spending time this evening, and good luck with the campaign, and we hope to have some good breaking news about Jason's release here soon. So we salute your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers. All right, viewers. Yep, such an important story. Like Kirstie said earlier on, we trust the police. We think they're there to protect us. And there are a lot of good cops because we've interviewed quite a few of them. And they've exposed the corruption that's going on. There's always good and bad in every institution, and there's going to be some bad ones. And it sounds like there certainly were some bad ones involved in this case. So, having met Kirstie and campaigned and spoke to the team, we're 100% behind this. And we urge you guys to go down to the description box and sign that petition. Yes, DMR, crying. I know. To hear Kirstie talk about her brother, how moved she is and how brave she is to step up and raise awareness. And, I can't imagine what the family's going through. He's been in prison for over a decade now. It is absolutely heartbreaking. So let's do what we can to support Jason Moore. So we've got the next guest coming in a couple of minutes, and that is Royal reporter Lydia at 8 p.m. UK. And hope to see some of you in the chat then. Other news, we've got the Royal Mess going out Friday night. And we have got an interview with a serial killer that was conducted through voice notes on WhatsApp on a contraband phone because he's serving life in Panama, coming out on Sunday. And we've also got a live with Julia, who was in the news. Julia from Poland with the eye coloration, who is wondering whether she is or not Madeleine McCann and has requested a DNA test. She is coming on live and she will be telling a story for the first time ever at length and taking your questions. And that's going to be on Sunday at 8 p.m. All right, so signing off this one now and hope to see some of you guys soon in the live stream with Royal Report.